Okay, I'm back. For some reason, after Google decided to do an upgrade or an alleged upgrade of their system, I have been having trouble trying to set these Google Hangout broadcasts up. And this is something I had to contact Google about. The same thing happened about a week ago when I was speaking on the year of mercy. Shortly after an hour, it just got that the call was disconnected or something. And then it said the internet was dropped or whatnot, but that was a lie because I was still connected to Twitter and other networks and was doing fine with them. So the problem is with Google Plus. They seem, or Google Hangouts rather, they seem to be having some bugs or whatnot, or maybe I'm using the older version of something. But for some reason, after an hour, these things get cut off. I don't know why, but I will contact somebody that I know from Google to see what's up with that. But anyway, I was trying to give a brief introduction to the book, Atheism is Stupid. So I'll continue where I left off before I was rudely interrupted by Google. But anyhow, on the right, the why did I write book, this book part is pretty much saying that I want to contribute to the world's knowledge and the things going on in the world and blah, 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 and whatnot. The next part that I speak on is the book cover. Again, this is hard for me to really, well, it's not hard, but probably it's hard for you because you can't see what I'm looking at, but I have the book in my hand. But if you go to my website, sacerdotus.com, and look at the book towards the right, you see the cover of it. I'm sure you've probably seen it already. It's black and it has a chalk figure image of, somebody sitting down, a student, with the atheism logo on the head. And it's meant to represent like a dunce. And I pretty much describe what the whole image is about. And it's pretty much a white chalk image of a student or figure sitting in the corner, like when they used to do back in the days. They used to put kids in the corner and whatnot. And the atheist logo is over the head, also in the shape of a cone, like they used to do back in the days with the dunce cone or the dunce hat. And again, this is not an attack on atheists. It's more symbolic. It's just something to draw attention to the book itself, cover or whatnot. And the image pretty much just represents this of me, of my time as an atheist. Pretty much in a corner, thinking that I knew it all and whatnot, and there was more to the classroom that I knew about, so to speak, in the sense that atheism kept me in the corner. I did not know more about the world, about religion and faith, all these different avenues of experience, of empiricism. I was closed off from it because of atheism. I was, in a sense, in the corner of the world with this hat of atheism, the A logo on the head, thinking that I knew it all, that I solved the world's problems by being an atheist. And in reality, I was just in the corner in the dark, not knowing anything about that. So that's pretty much what the image. There's more of it. You could read it when you if you get the book about the image on the cover. Next, I speak about how to use the book. Now, why do I do that? Because this book is unique. It's not a storybook. It's not a textbook. It's not a poetry or prayer book or religious book per se. This book is pretty much, you could think of it as me, like if I'm on CNN or something being interviewed, and I'm just sharing my story. I was an atheist for many years, for most of my life, and then little by little, I started to rethink atheism. I started to question atheism. I started to attack it, to reevaluate the atheism that was going on in my life, in my head, whatever it is that I thought at the time in regards to God, religion, faith, and all that, which is not really much to tell you the truth. Well, I don't cover this in the book. I'm just going to say this now, but I did say it before in another broadcast. But when I was an atheist, we just didn't think about God. And when I say we, I mean my family. We just God, religion was just not something that we thought about, or even we were aware of it, of course, because we have neighbors that are Catholic, Christian, and of course Jehovah's Witnesses will knock at the door, and I mentioned that in the book as well. And they will stop you on the street corner and give you the little Watchtower magazines and whatnot. So yeah, of course I was aware of religion and all that stuff, and of course my family was, but we didn't pay no mind to it. We didn't think about it. We didn't believe in it and all that. And it wasn't, and again, this is not in the book, but it wasn't until what I was like a little kid, probably 5 years old, 6 years old, that I heard about the story of Noah. And I think it was a friend or somebody who was trying to tell me the story, trying to be tell a story to a kid, babysitting type of scenario. So she was trying to tell me the story of Noah and the ark and all that stuff, and that God was gonna flood the world, and they told Noah to make this big boat and save two of every creature and whatnot. So as she's telling me the story, again, like I said in the broadcast that was interrupted before, my brain, I see things differently. I see things logically via patterns, mathematical things like that. And she's telling me the story. She's being emotional about it. She's sharing her faith and trying to tell us this biblical story to get the attention of myself and whatnot. But I wasn't seeing it the way she was. I was seeing it the way most atheists today see it. And I'm sure if you're listening to me right now and you're a Christian or whatever, you probably experienced this too, where atheists criticize God for flooding mankind. I mean, how could this guy be good where he just wipes out a whole race, a whole species? How can you call this father, this creator, good if he does that? So those are the questions that were going through my head when I was a little kid, when I was hearing this story and this lady telling me this about Noah and all that stuff. Whereas she's telling me the story, making God to look as this good guy. He's rescuing the world and whatnot. But I'm seeing it as this guy's a jerk. I mean, he's evil. He's killing everybody. It's like, how do you say? It's like spraying roaches with bug spray and then saying that you're a good guy. I mean, you're just killing a whole species of creatures, of insects. So that's the way I was thinking of it when I was a little kid, hearing this story of Noah and whatnot. So that's when I started to question this lady. I was like, did this really happen? I mean, it just sounds too fishy, too crazy to believe. I mean, and this was even before I obviously didn't know science at the time. I mean, I watched Channel 13 in New York City, public access television, Sesame Street, and those channels. And a couple of times I saw Nova. So I learned about that even as a little kid, 4 or 5 years old. I learned about space and things like that from Nova. And eventually from the Discovery Channel, I used to watch those things alongside with my cartoons, of course. I mean, you can't be a kid without watching cartoons. But as far as evolution and dinosaurs and all that stuff, I still didn't have that complete concept in my head. I was still a little kid. I did not know who Charles Darwin was until later on, probably 4th or 5th grade. But either way, the story of this lady was telling me of Noah's Ark was just incredulous. I just couldn't accept it. It just, God was a bad guy to me, and just the whole story didn't make sense. Trying to put two of every creature on this boat and whatnot, just by that factor alone, I had trouble with the story. So that was pretty much the first time I was really exposed to like a biblical story or whatnot. And to my knowledge, we didn't have a Bible at home at all. I mean, I have books. I have children's books, those little golden books. I used to read those when I was a little kid, and then eventually bought some books, scientific books, little children level books on science and things like dinosaurs. Of course, every kid loves dinosaurs. And and whatnot. And then in school, going to the Hayden Planetarium and watching the space show and all that, I just thought, wow, this is amazing, space, the universe, and all that. Because if you grow up in New York City, especially in the Bronx and all that, you don't see that many stars. So the only thing I got to see was a couple of stars and the moon whenever it decided to show up and whatnot. Because the lighting and the pollution in the city, you really cannot see the sky and the beauty of it. But of course, when in the trip to the planetarium, I was just wild, and I said to myself, I want to be a scientist, an astronaut, and whatnot. I wanted to study space. I wanted to study these things, and eventually I said, I want to study everything of science, not just space, but everything. And that's how I ended up in 20 years later studying biology, psychology, physics, and all these things because I wanted to know it all. I wanted to absorb it all. I didn't want to get focused on just one discipline. And as far as the religion, I didn't get any more experience other than that lady telling me about Noah's Ark and whatnot. Later on in fifth grade, junior high school, of course, kids are older and they learn how to socialize a little bit better than when you're in kindergarten and all that. So that's when I used to talk to certain classmates, and some of them were Jehovah's Witnesses. And I remember when every Wednesday the principal used to speak on the speaker on the PA system, telling people, the teachers, to release the students who were going to religious instructions. And I had no idea what the hell that was. What was religious instruction? And why do these kids get to leave early and whatnot? But anyway, I had no idea what that was. Now I do. I know that has to do with communion classes and all that stuff. But back then I had no idea what the hell that was. So I eventually became more exposed to religion and all that through peers, people, Pentecostal classmates, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Baptists and whatnot, who try to start conversations about religion and whatnot during the lunch and whatnot. And I went through the public school system. I never went to Catholic school or any other religious school other than the ones now, of course, that I'm studying at and different seminaries and whatnot. But growing up, I was just in public school and a public secular university, CUNY, the City University of New York. And I was honored to have some of the great professors for physics, for astrophysics, theoretical physics, Mikio Kaku, I'm sure you know very well, and philosophy, Dr. Massimo Pilucci. Both of them were excellent teachers, and they really opened up my mind to learn more, to continue learning more. And there's a host of other professors out there, Professor Maybe, Professor Lasardi. I could go on and on. So many great professors that I learned from, all these different things. So I wanted to put all these things that I learned, all this knowledge and everything into this book, while at the same time trying to tell the story of why I moved from atheism to Catholicism to theism. Even though in the book I don't really mention the conversion or the transition to Catholicism, but because the book is mainly about criticizing atheism, attacking the core principles of atheism. So I put in this part how to use this book, and I explain why I did certain things in the book, and why I wrote italicized certain things, and why in some parts I actually repeat myself. I duplicate something that I already said, and I do that for a reason because I want the reader to really pay attention to that point. So this part is just basically about format and all that stuff of the book, and I leave space there so people can write notes and whatnot. And I want to make it clear that this book is a work in progress. Just because it's out there and it's on sale and whatnot doesn't mean that's the end of it. I do intend to update this book because, again, science is constantly updating, philosophy is constantly updating, and I need to include that into my arguments of atheism because that's how I transitioned from atheism to theism. by knowledge, by taking time to reevaluate atheism based on what I was learning from academia and so forth. Because it wasn't a pope that convinced me to be Catholic. It wasn't a priest, a preacher priest like I don't know, John Karapi, who was in a scandal a couple years ago, or Evangelical EWTN, or any of those things, or an apologetics book, or William Lane Craig. It wasn't anybody like that that got me. I didn't even know who the heck they were. I learned about them in my 20s. I didn't know who they were. And of course, I knew who the Pope was because we learned about him in history and social studies. Of course, you know who the Pope is. It's not a figure that you're not aware of because he's a head of state, just like you learn of President, whoever, President Clinton at the time and whatnot, and Queen Elizabeth and all these different characters. So this book is going to be updated, and there are going to be new volumes of it, volume 2, volume 3, and they're going to address different aspects of atheism, which I question and reevaluated, dissected, and refuted. And because I didn't include everything in this book, there's much more. It's a whole lifetime process. You cannot expect to fill a whole lifetime of experiences and reevaluations and whatnot into just one book. So this is why this is volume 1, and it's going to be several volumes where I address more things of atheism that I question and pretty much dissected and found it to be, for lack of a better term, stupid. That's why I call Atheism Is Stupid. And again, the title is not to call atheists stupid. I'm not calling atheists stupid. I'm calling the concept of atheism stupid because this is the story of the way my brain was working, how I transitioned from atheism to theism, and the conclusions that I came about. And I explain why I came to those conclusions. So back to the table of contents. I start with an introduction, of course, and I'm pretty much. I think you could see the introduction on Amazon. I think if you click the book, it says look inside, you could probably see it. But the problem is that they put the draft version for some reason. So there might be some words that are different from the actual book that's out there. And but the introduction you could also probably see there in the inside on the book feature that they have on Amazon. And I guess I'll read it to you, the introduction. It's on page 15 of the book, and it says, for nearly most of my life, I was an atheist. I simply did not care for religious ideas and found them to be silly. Growing up, seeing people profess all kinds of religious ideas was interesting. I could not wait to run into Jehovah's Witnesses at home or on the street and corner them with questions I knew they could not answer. If they were not around, I would approach Pentecostals, Baptists, and other evangelicals who would stand on the sidewalk with a speaker and microphone, shouting and warning everyone to prepare for the end of the world and accept Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior. Their shouts and cries about 666 and how the government would instill chips in our bodies with this code would give me a chuckle and cause me to shake my head in disbelief. These people are nuts, I would think to myself. Seriously, who believes this? What evidence do they have? In public school and eventually college, I would run into Christian club members who came to me with that Christian facade of being too nice and too friendly. They were like this for obvious reasons. They wanted people to join them and their cult. Anyhow, I would accept their invitation and attend their meetings, where I would question the heck out of them. They all seemed to give the same answers, almost like a Turing test artificial intelligence program, which simulate human communication by replying with set phrases based on the input it receives. The answers were usually Bible based, with a bit of emotion and anecdotal personal experiences mixed in, which are meant to make the answer more relatable to the human experience. This, along with a friendly attitude and smile, were always used. However, when I questioned the answers, and pinpointed the fallacies in them, they would get annoyed, and the too nice and Christian facade will begin to crumble. Some will even condemn him to hell. One today, ironically, is gay and was excommunicated from his Christian community after being discovered. Anyhow, to me, this seems strange. Why would they get annoyed? Supposedly, God will speak on their behalf and give them the answers, right? It seemed they had no answers and were not prepared to answer questions that followed up on their program replies. As I got older and focused more on my studies in physics, biology, psychology, and philosophy, I began to realize that God may not be a bad explanation after all for the causality of everything. Atheism started to make less sense. Instead of being this state of rational enlightenment, it became a conglomeration of speculative reasoning, which led nowhere. Like with the Protestant Christians from the club, atheists too had their programming as well, where they relied on a set response for each input. I started to realize that atheists had no answers, only questions, misconceptions, and irrational conclusions. Atheism, to be blunt, was a stupid concept. Here is why. So that's the introduction. That's how it starts in the book. Then I begin from there. I start telling why I found atheism to be stupid. And chapter one is entitled Free Thought. And you probably could guess what it is about: free thought, free thinking. Many atheists like to use that mantra. They say they are free thinkers and they're not restricted by religion or dogma or whatnot. And you hear that everywhere. So by saying that they're free thinkers, they allege that they're able to process ideas and create new ideas and whatnot, and not worry about having a preacher or pope or anybody tell them how to think and what to believe. So I take on that mantra and I present it, I show where it comes from, and I dissect it. I explain why it doesn't make sense and why, in reality, atheists are not free thinkers. They just recycle the same arguments that were already refuted centuries ago. So I go more into detail with that. Then, in the same chapter, chapter one, I start with what's called the subsection Denial of Causality. And in this section, I pretty much get more scientific. I start analyzing the idea that atheists hold that God is not necessary for creation, for the existence of the universe. So I start to analyze that question. Is God really necessary? So I start to tackle that question, that concept from atheists. You see science, philosophy, and so forth, and show why the atheist really has no ground to disqualify God as the creator, as the causal factor of the universe. So that's where it gets even more interesting if you're into science and philosophy and all that. Then it's chapter two. And chapter two begins with abuse of science. And again, it continues a bit from the denial of causality from chapter one. In the abuse of science, I start going through certain ideas of science, the theory of evolution, the cosmic inflation, aka the Big Bang Theory, the brain collision, all these different things, ideas in physics and in regards to cosmology and whatnot. And of course, like I said, evolution. I start analyzing these scientific concepts that atheists like to use a lot to claim that God is not necessary or that God doesn't exist. So I put all that into perspective. I present it how the atheist presents it. Then I dissect it. Do they really understand what they're talking about in regards to these scientific theories? Do they really understand what the Big Bang is about, or the brain collision, or the theory of evolution? Do they really understand that? I present that. I dissect that part. Then I start to dissect the argument itself. Why the atheists, when they rely on these theories to try to claim that God is not necessary or doesn't exist, why it doesn't work, why those arguments do not work. And again, I use pure science. There's no religion in there. There's no catechism, no quotes from a saint or anybody else or the Bible or not. I go specifically with science, using science to refute the sophisms that atheists hold. Hence the title Abuse of Science. I show how atheists, while claiming to be uh, bearers of science or that they value science a lot, are actually hurting science by trying to use science as a way to present atheism. I explain why that doesn't work. Using science. Then from there, I go into the attack of philosophy. Now, many atheists, especially the new atheists today, not necessarily the older atheists from back in the day, but the new atheists, the so-called new atheists of today, they love to attack philosophy. From Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss, Sam Harris, and whatnot, they love to put down philosophy. They say philosophy is useless, that it's just people thinking, they're just regurgitating their own opinions, and it doesn't help anybody. Philosophy is like I remember I quote from Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he said in a podcast that philosophers like a group of people that are trying to cross the street, but they stay talking at the corner about how to cross the street while the scientist actually crosses the street. And that's something that he said. I'm paraphrasing him, but that's what he said in a podcast. And I actually quote him in the book, in the chapter. And I go and defend philosophy. And I quote from my own professor, Professor Massimo Pellucci, who's an atheist himself. And he has his own podcast, Rationally Speaking, which is an excellent podcast, very knowledgeable. I mean, of course, I don't agree with everything he says, but he's one of my professors, so of course I'm going to be have some kind of loyalty to him. And he's excellent. He's a great guy, and so I quote from him. I quote from his blog, from his books, and whatnot, from my former professor, who's a philosopher and also a biologist. And I defend philosophy. I present the argument that philosophy is necessary, and that science and other academic fields actually come from philosophy. Hence, PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. If you get a PhD in biology and math and physics, psychology, at the end of your name is PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. Why? Because all of these disciplines come from philosophy. Philosophy is the mother of academic disciplines. So I explain why it's ridiculous for atheists, specifically new atheists, to attack philosophy. It's like attacking your own mother, where your DNA came from. Science owes its existence to philosophy. Then I go on to chapter 3. Chapter 3 starts with misrepresenting history. Now, this is something atheists do a lot. They love to bring up Galileo and Copernicus and Bruno and all these different figures in history, claiming that the Catholic Church was out to kill them and whatnot, and burn them at the stake, and about the Crusades and whatnot. So I started going through each of these episodes in history and present how atheists view these historical events. And then I dissect it. I show why it doesn't correlate to actual facts. It's based on misinformation and presentism, or the idea that of analyzing the past via our understanding of the present, which is a sin in history, in the discipline of history. So I focus on that and the Crusades and all these different episodes in history, which atheists love to bring up, and I show the facts. And again, this is from history. I quote from the historians of actually what happened during these historical times and why these scientists were not persecuted by the church, and why their crimes were that they were trying to tell the church what to do in regards to doctrine. and that the church had no business in regards to their scientific research, and why the idea of geocentrism was never part of the church's teaching, and that the church actually wanted Galileo to prove his case. They were waiting on him. Cardinal Bellarmine was trying to get Galileo to defend his idea, and which he actually got from Copernicus, heliocentrism. But unfortunately, Galileo wasn't able to prove his case. He didn't have evidence, and it wasn't his fault because he didn't have the technology. Today we have the technology; we could tell that the Earth revolves around the sun, but he did not have the technology. He could not really make his case. And at the time, the people adopted the Aristotelian model, and Aristotle made a strong case for it. But again, that was based on the primitive knowledge, and we cannot blame Aristotle for that. We cannot call Aristotle an imbecile or scientifically illiterate or not, because he had to use what he had available. Then I go on to one of the biggest part of the books, and that's the problem of evil. And many of you know the problem of evil, which is something that many atheists love to bring up and discuss. And it deals with the idea of why does evil exist if there's supposedly a good God? And the idea comes from Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, which we believe it comes from him. Somebody else might have thought of it before, but we don't have any documentation of it. But I introduce it, what's the problem, and then I present different arguments that atheists use in regards to the problem of evil, and dissect it, of course. And some of these problems that I mentioned are, of course, how can evil exist if there's a good God? And then I go and address what I spoke about before, the Noah's Ark thing. Why would God flood the whole world, or destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, or did God commit genocide with the Amalekites or whatnot? I address all of these different things which atheists tend to bring up, and I show the why the atheist conclusion is based on straw man arguments and has no basis in actual facts. I also mentioned the verse from the King James Version, which atheists love to use, which says that God created evil, and I show how that's a bad translation, and I actually present why the words in the original language do not convey that message, and it was a bad translation by those who created the King James Version of the Bible. And I continue from there with the other more incidents regarding evil in the world, things that happen in the world, and why atheists love to blame God for it, and say that God doesn't exist because those bad things, evil things happen in the world. I address it right there in that chapter. It's a very heavy topic, and I also addressed the about the unicorns. I give an example of that. A lot of atheists claim that the Bible says this, that unicorns exist. Again, I bring that up briefly in that chapter as well, and address why. Again, that's their straw man. Next is chapter 4, is the contrarian position. And again, this is more of a psychological approach to the book, where I psychoanalyze atheists. And what I mean by the contrarian position is when an atheist wants to argue with you, even when you present facts and evidence, but they still want to be contrary to what you say. They still want to continue or play pigeon chess, as they call it. And they do not even bother to analyze the information that you give and just argue for the sake of arguing. And I address why that's a problem with atheists. Then I go on to cognitive filter, which is one of the main causes of the contrary position. And again, I'm arguing from a psychological point of view, and I use psychology and so forth. The straw man, again, I use certain examples of why the atheist uses a straw man and the psychological basis behind that. The no evidence mantra. When atheists claim that there's no evidence for God, I address it and explain why that mantra is not valid and why it's a psychological defense mechanism. Then I go to chapter 5. Chapter 5, I start with reflective equilibrium, which is another, again, a big term in philosophy. And what it means is that we tend to balance things out that we agree with. We try to make it agree with other things. That's what they call it, reflective. You reflect on your own opinions, your own strongly held beliefs, and you try to keep an equilibrium between them and new information that you get. And an example of that is when atheists with science. They try to balance science in a way that conforms to their reflection, which is atheism, their personal ideas of regarding atheism. After that, I speak on this is more sociological issue, and so the white man problem. And what I mean by that is the majority of atheists today are white men, white wealthy men, and I address why that's a problem and why many minorities who are atheists or claim to be atheists see it as a problem. And again, I quote certain leaders in minority atheist groups who question why the atheism movement today is pretty much run by white rich men, and why minorities are left out and women also are left out. Next is chapter 6. I speak on presentism. And again, I spoke about that a little bit before, which is the idea that the people apply their understanding of life now, as we see it today, on the past. So we see the George Washington owning slaves we read about in history. And some of us would say, oh, George Washington was evil. He was racist or not. But you don't realize, or you refuse to acknowledge, that that was how the people thought back then. Slavery was legal. People bought slaves, unfortunately. That was the status quo at the time. And it would be irresponsible to call those people evil just for living in their period, in their time. Just like today, we have abortion and all these things. And I'm sure years from now, centuries from now, people might think of us as being evil and primitive for killing our own unborn children. Then I address evidence and I start to get into more detail of science and so forth in regards to evidence of God and so forth. Next is chapter 7, and it begins with the primum movement, so the prime mover, and then I address that argument again from a scientific and philosophical point of view, about the causal factor that began the universe. Is it a random processy or is it intelligence? And I start to address those things and analyze it and present it and show the facts. Then I go into scientism, and scientism is the idea that everything needs to be measured via science. And again, going back to the attack on philosophy, where some scientists attack philosophy claiming that it's useless and whatnot. And these scientists are pretty much into scientism. They see science as the main instrument from which we measure everything. And we cannot think that way. And I explain why. Why science, despite allowing us to split atoms and go to the moon and all these things, why science alone does not work, and why we need philosophy, mathematics, history, and other disciplines in our human knowledge. Then I go to chapter 8, and this chapter is mostly a lot, what do you call it, astronomy and astrophysics, pretty much. And I explain about different things in the universe and how they show that the anthropic principle, or that the universe is set up in a way to protect life and host life and allow life to evolve. And I go through different sections of knowledge of astronomy and astrophysics, about the hostility of the universe, the Earth's outer body guards, the ozone layer, the magnetosphere, and the heliosphere. Then it's the conclusion. The conclusion is pretty lengthy, and I pretty much summarize everything again. Take everything and summarize it, and then close it up. And that's pretty much what the book is. And again, it's my critique of atheism. And it's not meant to attack atheists. I want to make that clear. It's just a criticism of atheism from me as a science student, a science graduate, and why I came to the conclusion that atheism is stupid. And I pretty much presented there. Free from religious dogma. There's no religious dogma. Even though I do quote from the Pope, certain popes, and things like that, but I do that to amplify a certain point that I'm making in regards to tackling an argument made by an atheism. That's the only reason why I quote a pope or whatnot. And the same thing whenever I quote a specific Bible passage, I do so in order to address a specific issue of the Bible that an atheist has, or that atheism in general presents. I address that there. So that's pretty much what the book is about. And in the next volume, I'm going to continue more on major arguments that atheists like to use against God and whatnot, and build upon that. And I'm going to use the same format, introducing the argument that atheists use, the concept, the misconception, whatever. Then I explain why it's a misconception and so forth. And then I use knowledge from my background and other academic disciplines and explain why it doesn't work. And move on from there. And again, it's going to be a whole different volume, whole different. It might touch on certain things from the first book in order to keep them linked together, like a continuation. So definitely, I will be quoting from this book, the second book, just to continue the series, so that both books are connected. Volume 1 flows into Volume 2. Volume 1 and 2 flow into Volume 3, and so forth. So that's how I intend to continue the series of these books and touch upon different ideas and whatnot, which atheists love to use. The second volume would touch a lot about certain ideas that atheists have, misconceptions on the Bible and so forth, like Jesus has to give away your wealth, and meanwhile you see the Pope with all these gold investments and all that. I'm going to address those things there, and the misconceptions that the atheists have on pedophilia and the Catholic clergy. I'm going to address that there as well as other ideas, misconceptions that atheists have regarding certain biblical passages and how they get carried away with the interpretation and create all kinds of crazy ideas based on a bad interpretation of the text or cherry picking from them. And I will continue more on science and history, why certain ideas in science, certain theories and knowledge is misused by atheists in order to present science as the torch or the force behind atheism, which is not. And I made that clear also in the first volume. So hopefully you pick up the book and read it. And this book will definitely help any theist out there, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever, or non-Christian, or even a Hindu, anyone who believes in God in a different way. This book will definitely help you to defend God and the principle of God, the concept of God, the concept of religion. It will help you defend them much better. You'll be much better prepared. Again, it's not necessarily a Catholic book, even though I do defend Catholic history and so forth. It's more of a general book, an academic book, because again, it's just, I don't want to say story, but it's like think of it as me being interviewed, and I'm just sitting there on the talk show and I'm telling the people, why I came to the conclusion of atheism being stupid, and I go into detail. You see my fields of study, science, philosophy, etc., and work myself from there. So that's what the book is basically all about. And those atheists out there who are genuinely honest and objective, who are not quick to judge, and who are not scared to rethink their own ideas and beliefs, then the book will really be beneficial for them. And I already learned from somebody emailed me the other day that the book actually helped them a lot, and it, they're now in the process of rethinking God and all that. They're not necessarily converting, but they're giving me the impression that the book is dissolving atheism within them. And again, if you're honest, if you're an atheist who's honest and objective, then that's what's going to happen. You're going to say, wait a minute, he has a point. Because this book should be more like an atheist speaking to another atheist. But the atheist speaking is sharing why atheism became stupid to him, to me. So that's pretty much the theme of the book. It's not meant to attack atheists. It's not meant to ridicule atheists or anyone else. So anyone out there posting fake reviews and whatnot, they never bother to read the book. And you could tell these people are just being spiteful and obviously do not value science or knowledge, because that's what I use in the book. I tell why I came to the conclusion that atheism is stupid using science, philosophy, and other fields of study, history and mathematics. Certain parts, the last couple of chapters actually show equations and things like that, mathematical equations and so forth. So, I mean, just give it a chance if you're an honest atheist out there and all that. And I would have loved to have somebody or a couple of people here. Too bad the other guy that joined me the last time in August wasn't available. I haven't seen him in a while, but one guy just messaged me saying that he wanted to join, but he emailed me late, and I specifically stated that to message me before 11 p.m. That way I check my email. I have the email, so who to invite. And then when I set up this broadcast, when it asks me to invite people, I already have the emails and I invite them, and they stay there waiting until the thing actually goes on the air. And then I introduce them. This is so-and-so, this is so-and-so. And then we get a discussion going. But unfortunately, this guy messaged me late, and now he's whining and complaining on Google Plus about it. And I mean, it's not my fault. You have to learn how to follow the instructions. I mean, I try to be organized the best I can, and hopefully the next time he'll get to go on, or somebody else, or whatever, and we could actually get a discussion going instead of having to listen to me talking and whatnot. And whatnot. But at least I try to get my book out there to give a brief introduction to it. There's so much stuff in that book that I really cannot go into detail because, well, for one, I'll be giving the book away, and two, it will just take hours for me to really go through each chapter, through each subsection of the chapters, and analyzing and presenting it and whatnot. And it's like a dissertation, a very heavy dissertation, which takes hours to present to a faculty board. And so the book is out there. Atheism Is Stupid. I tend to have a lot of revisions made to the book as new information and science comes in and whatnot. And of course the following volumes, volume 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., which will continue and present new criticism or new critiques of atheism and whatnot. So thank you for listening. Again, Happy New Year to everyone, and I hope everyone enjoyed Christmas. Whether you're an atheist or not, hopefully you enjoy it with your family and friends, and hopefully you start off this new year with many good things, positive things, and get rid of old bad habits and try to start new good habits, and just try to bring more peace and love into this world, which is lacking of it as of late. So thank you and good night wherever you are, or good morning wherever you are.